Hello, class. So today, well, this is Mr. Wibby, and today we will be learning about George Washington and the influence that he had on building the United States as a new nation. What we're looking at today, our objective is the students will be able to explain George Washington's role as the first president of the United States. So let's go ahead and look at our essential questions. Our essential questions. So the first one, why did Americans want George Washington to serve as the first president of the United States? Our second question, what were some of George Washington's appointments? Our third question, what role did Martha Washington play as the first woman? And then our final question, what city was chosen to be the United States' first capital city? All right, so let's go ahead and get started with today's lecture. All right, so George Washington. George Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732. He was born in Westmoreland County, Virginia. He was 6'2". His height was 6'2". His presidential term started April 30, 1789. His wife was Martha Washington. He didn't have any kids. Random facts about George Washington, most people know or talk about the fact that George Washington had wooden teeth. They used to teach that he had wooden teeth. George Washington did not have wooden teeth. He actually extracted teeth from slaves, and he wore the teeth of slaves in his mouth. George Washington. So Americans believe that George Washington was honest, intelligent, and a steady leader. He proved that with his leadership during the American Revolution. So because he was a great leader during the American Revolution, most Americans wanted George Washington to serve as our first president. According to George Washington, he didn't want to be the first president. He was ready to retire and, go to his plantation home. But he was convinced to become the first president. Back then, we had the Electoral College, and the Electoral College is a group or a body of electors who represents the people's vote in choosing a president. So the president isn't the people elect the president, but they don't directly elect the president. The president is chosen through a process that is called the Electoral College. In January of 1789, each of the 11 states that passed the Constitution sent electors to choose the first president. The Electoral College selected George Washington as the first president, and John Adams became the first vice president. All right, so here is information showing the Electoral College of 1789. So right here, it shows each state. It shows the number of delegates, and it shows the number of delegates and who they voted for. So you had several people running for president, but George Washington got the most delegate votes. So he got 69 delegate votes, and right behind George Washington is Adams, who received 34 delegate votes. Martha Washington. So George Washington's wife name is Martha Washington. She is considered to be the first lady. As the first lady, Martha Washington entertained guests and attended social events with her husband. So you have to remember that George Washington became the first president in the late 1700s. Today, first ladies and women are more active in politics. Back then, the expectation for, women engaged in politics was far less. So therefore, more liberal women believed that Martha Washington needed to play a greater role in politics and have more of a voice, because women didn't have representatives in Congress. They were represented by men and their husband, or in the political process, I'm sorry. So there was a concept called Republican motherhood. It was the idea that women should play a more important role in teaching their children and how to be good citizens. So at this time, women were expected to care for their families and like manage the homes. So a woman's role was viewed as being important to the house and the household. All right, so we have a precedent. Now, precedents are actions or decisions that serve as an example. George Washington, because he's the first president under the US Constitution, his presidency set precedent because he is the first person to like actually serve in that office. So George Washington was the first president to do a lot of things, but here are the ones. So he created departments in the executive branch. He met with department heads and cabinet members to get advised on how he should go about doing things. He picked Alexander Hamilton as his first Secretary of Treasury. He also picked Thomas Jefferson as his first Secretary of State, and he chose Henry Knox as his Secretary of War. Now, one of our questions for today is, what was the first capital city? So our first capital city happened to be in New York City. New York was the first capital city. In 1790, only New York City and Philadelphia had populations larger than 25,000. What this implies, or what this says, is that most of the United States was rural areas. It was made of small towns that didn't have a lot of people that lived in them. Most of the people lived on farms and what we would consider today is the country. New York was known for international trade and business. In 1792, 24 stockbrokers signed an agreement under a button tree on Wall Street. This event set the stage for what would become known as the New York Stock Exchange, where business people trade stocks. So that's my lecture for today. Use this lecture to answer those essential questions and complete the assignment for today. You guys will be creating a graphically organized and illustrated poster of George Washington that highlights his accomplishments as the first president of the United States.